So welcome, friends of the Women Awakening Project. We are here today with Prajna Hallstrom. Thank you so much for having me here and for all the amazing work you have done. There will be so much to ask you. I will try to be very synthetic. So first of all, I would like to start by getting to know what was your gateway to spirituality?
When I was in my 20s, I began to practice Hatha Yoga, and I started to read a lot of scriptures from the East. I had been brought up Christian and had found just not what I was looking for there. And so I turned towards scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita and Autobiography of a Yogi. And when I read Autobiography of a Yogi, I saw all these great saints that Yogananda had met, one of whom was Anandamayi Ma. And so I was very touched by that chapter and the idea that there was this great spiritual being who was in a female body was very striking to me. So from then on, I was thinking about, should I find a guru? Should I go to India? And indeed, I did find a guru when I was 30 years old, and went to India and joined an ashram of Swami Muktananda. And I was with him for 17 years or so. Yeah, that's the beginning.
This is how you got to know Anandamayi Ma.
That was how. And then while I was in India in 1978 with Muktananda, we were sitting in a courtyard and he stopped everything and said, all of you here must go meet Anandamayi Ma. He said, you must get up right now from the courtyard and go find her because she is God in a female body. And I was like, absolutely, I was just blown away by that prospect. But I knew I couldn't wander around India because I had my little girls with me who were 5 and 7. And so I sort of kept it in my heart as okay, this is a very important thing to do, even if I can't do it right now.
And so how did it happen then that you bump into her again?
Yeah. Well, sadly for me, 4 years from then, in 1982, Anandamayi Ma left her body at the age of 86. And I had not made it back to India at that point. So I was very sad. And also Muktananda died that same year. So I went into a period of, what do I do now? My physical guru is dead. This divine mother has left her body. And so I decided to sort of drown my sorrows by going to graduate school in Hinduism. So I applied to Harvard to the divinity school program, and I studied Sanskrit and studied all the saints of India and women in Hinduism. And meanwhile, I started to feel like I should do my PhD. I should go on and keep doing this. But it has to be really meaningful what I choose to do. So I was writing a paper in the library, and I went into a back room of the Harvard Library, the Divinity School Library, and just on that one day, they were laying out an entire archive of Anandamayi Ma. So a young man had died in India, and his parents were donating tapes, photos, all of Ma's pictures, every book that had been written on her in every language. And it was all there that one day on the tables. And I realized that it was grace and that I could apply to the PhD program and write my dissertation on Anandamayi Ma. Therefore, sort of immersing myself in her, even though I had never gotten to meet her in person. Mm-hmm. So it was an incredible gift.
This is Mother of Bliss. Yes. This is your dissertation. Okay.
So in this book, I was able to look at all these 5 aspects of Ma. Ma as a woman, Ma as a saint, Ma as guru, and Ma as avatara. And then the last chapter is about gender in the Hindu tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking through the lens of this extraordinary being.
Yeah, which is very hard to define as well. I mean, there are many ways probably to
Right.
try to define her identity, which is
Right.
yeah. So who is Anandamayi Ma? Because maybe some of the people listening don't know who is Anandamayi Ma, and then who is for you? Who is she for you?
Okay, so when I went to India, I had thought of her as a great being, a great saint who was a woman. And I was corrected very dramatically at my first meeting with one of her famous devotees, where this famous writer who'd written a biography, many biographies of Ma, asked me, "So why are you here? Why do you want to study Ma?" And I said, "Because I love women saints." And this woman, Bitaka Mukherjee, said to me, "My dear Lisa," which is my Western name, "my dear Lisa, Ma was neither a woman nor a saint." It was at that moment, right at the beginning of my year in Varanasi, where I was centered. I later traveled all over India interviewing Ma's devotees, that I realized that most people who were devoted to Ma, which is thousands of people in India, she was really the greatest woman saint of that century. And everybody respected her as sort of like the divine mother of all, the umbrella. At the Kumbh Mela, she rode on the elephant at the beginning of the Kumbh Mela. She didn't want to, but they made her. So that's how she was seen.
Okay.
And so I realized that for most people, she was considered an avatar, like Rama or Krishna or Jesus, that she had come to this earth with no karma for the sake of all of the beings who are suffering at this really difficult time in history. 1896 was when she was born. So her life spanned the First and Second World Wars, partition in India, and there was so much suffering all over the world. So that's when she chose to come. So as I went around and interviewed people, I ended up asking a very open question: who is Ma? And everyone had a different answer. You know, the most common answer was, "You cannot know Ma." And you cannot know Ma. But then they would go on to say Ma was Parabrahman. She was beyond any difference. She was the one. She is that. She is the Divine Mother. She is Kali. She is Durga. And every once in a while, someone would say, "She's my mother." You know, that's so many people saw her as their personal mother. So she lived this quite long life, which began in Bengal, and then she came and began to travel around India. Her husband, she had a marriage that was a spiritual marriage, where her husband was her first devotee. And then she proceeded to sort of wander around India. She never stayed in one place longer than 2 weeks. She attracted hundreds of thousands of people to her. She had this magnetic joy. Ananda means bliss or joy. And Mai, so she's the bliss-permeated mother. And so people would be drawn to her from all walks of life. The great heads of state, Gandhi came to her for blessings. Indira Gandhi was her devotee. So she was very, very famous. Yet she had no education. She wrote no books. It was her presence that drew people. And people would come to her, and yes, there were many miracles around her, sort of healings and different kinds of miracles. But the greatest miracle was that everyone who came to her experienced this huge awakening, where they're, instead of turning their attention and their mind outwards, they began to turn it within. Just being in her presence there was a contagious presence that they experienced. And there's wonderful hundreds of stories in this book and in other books of, you know, people coming sort of innocently to meet this Divine Mother, and then the rest of their life they were with her. So she was very, very revered all over India. And when she died, it was, you know, in the top, it was the headline of the Times of India as her funeral procession made its way from Dehradun, where she left her body, to Kankal, which is near Haridwar, where her Samadhi shrine is, where she was buried. So that was in 1982. That's just a brief synopsis of her amazing life.
Sounds amazing. Yeah. And we don't have many cases of avatar, female avatar, no? So in this sense, right? We have quite a few male avatar, but female avatar, I think, in this sense, she contributed to this perception. But I want to ask you, I know that then you went to India exactly studying and researching on how Indian women were empowered by having a female guru like her. So what was your discoveries when you went to look for this?
Well, yes, my thesis, my hypothesis was that women around Ma would receive a special empowerment just being able to identify with her as a woman. What I discovered is very, very few women around Ma. And Ma never, for the last 50 years of her life, she never brought food to her own mouth. She was completely disinterested in food, really in the body. She referred to herself as this body, but her real identity was as the self. Atman, Brahman. So people had to take care of her because she was in samadhi almost all the time. So this group of women who took care of her, her physical needs and, sort of mediated between her and all these devotees who were swarming, thousands of people swarming towards her. They were very close to her, but did they identify her as a role model? No, not at all. They felt everyone perceived her as something completely over and above. She was in form, but she was a manifestation of the formless Brahman, of the one, of Tat, of, Parabrahman. So they were not saying, oh, I think I'm going to be like Ma. They were taking her teachings on how they could, become lose ego, become more of a, more of a realized person. But she was not someone who became realized in their mind. Mm-hmm. She was someone who began as a child. She was born in this world, and even she describes her own birth that way as being fully conscious. She remembers everything about her birth, who was there, who wasn't there. So she was in such a different category.
Yeah.
That people wanted to be her child. Some people wanted to take care of her as almost like in a motherly way, but then very few women said, I'm going to be like Ma. Yet she did empower women in many ways. She gave the sacred thread to some of her close devotees, the sacred thread that happens for Brahmin men at in their sort of as an initiation in their early teenage years. She gave that sacred thread to women, which was, she believed had been done in the early Vedic times, and then it had stopped. It had started only being for men. So she at one point had all the women in the ashram build a beautiful building to have a yajna, a sacred fire ceremony for peace in the world. It was only built by they designed it, they hired everybody, they handled the whole thing. So there was a way in which the women around her were very powerful, including the householders at home had received practices from her. She told the husbands to worship their wives as the goddess. There was a lot of ways that she did empower women. So it was a kind of a complex picture, but in terms of, can I aspire to be like Ma? I don't think anybody had that in their mind because she was so otherworldly. It was just impossible.
Although we are all that, it's difficult to relate probably when you see it actually in form.
In form. In real life, there is a being who is constantly identified with the absolute. And we can aspire to, and she wanted us to. So all her teachings and her conversations in the second book, that I just published, which is in 2 volumes. These are transcripts of her questions and answer sessions throughout the last 20 years of her life, the Gospel of Sri Anandamayi Ma. And in those, she's constantly bringing people back to who they really are. She cannot settle for people thinking that they're a separate self, or, you know, a woman or a man or a father or a mother, or an engineer. She's constantly reminding people, and often in a very joking way, but Baba, you are Rama, you are God, and her devotees saying, no ma, that's not what I was asking. And she would say, no, you are Sita. No, I'm not Sita. So she's constantly cajoling them largely into realizing their true identity. And the phrase that she said most often was, Ekam Brahma Dvitiya Nasti. So God is one, there is no second. So she would say, there is no second. That would be her answer all the time. So even between her and her disciple, we are one. So she never separated herself out as different from them. She was saying, no, you and I are the same. You and this body, we are that. So it's only in the world of the mind, Manoraja, that we imagine ourselves to be separate. So the teaching was relentless. In this book, 900 pages of her convincing people that they're not who they think they are.
So you came into contact with this immense treasure, right? And you had the mission to
yes,
to transcribe it, basically, and to translate it into English. So you did this job with Sanya. What's her name? Sorry,
Jaya Sanyal Bandyopadhyaya.
Okay.
Yes. So when the archive first came to the Harvard Divinity School, I was asked to give a talk on Ma and the archive. And I did, and I met a lot of some of her closest devotees who were part of donating the archive. And at that time, they gave me transcriptions of many of the tapes that some Brahmin Pandit had been hired to do. He was not a devotee. He put a lot of his own commentary in there. Okay. And it was not very accurate. So I prayed to Ma, please send me someone who can help me turn into this treasure chest because I had a big box, I still have it upstairs, a big box of all of those transcripts. How can I turn that into something that's authentically Ma? So within a month, I found out that one of Ma's devotees, who'd grown up in Ma's family, she actually was the grandniece of Ma, so she's Bengali, but she studied in Delhi, so she's very fluent in Hindi, because Ma spoke mostly Hindi in these transcripts, but some Bengali also. So lo and behold, this Jaya, her relative, was coming to Boston for an arranged marriage with another biologist. She was a biologist. So I met her right away. We totally hit it off. And she said, yes, I'd love to help you with this project. So together we went to Harvard Divinity School, and they were so gracious to us because they have to, each time we went 5 days a week, they would bring in all these tapes and say, which one do you want now? And we had headsets, and they had a boombox, and we would play Ma speaking these words. So Ma's satsangs, one after the other. And I had reproduced the translation, which wasn't so good, in 2, one for her, one for me. Mm-hmm. And each tape, there were 48 of them. And then she would be looking and correcting on hers. I would be looking at the English flow questions that I had, and I would stop sometimes and say, Jaya, this doesn't sound like Ma. So we'd go back over, listen again. I only understand a little Hindi. She's fluent in both Hindi and Bengali. And some of them had not ever been translated to the Bengali part, so she did that. So we did this for like 8 months, just such beautiful seva, sitting in this room, beautiful, looking over the gardens, listening to Ma's voice. We always did the introductory mantras to begin with, and it was filled with Ma's presence, the whole project. And Yeah, so it took 8 years to get published. It took about 6 years to edit. But the joy, for me, it was my full sadhana during that time, the joy of sitting and reading Ma's words all day long and making sure that they had the right tone to them and that, that Westerners could understand what she's saying.
Yeah.
So I did have a couple of sections where I would explain something that was particularly Bengali or Hindi, yeah, so it was a labor of love and it was so wonderful. It was such a blessing.
Yes, wow. Really, really an amazing blessing. And so it's the title is The Gospel of Sri Anandamayi Ma. I just want to say for who doesn't know what a satsang is. So this is 20 years, right, of question and answer, basically.
Yes.
Between Anandamayi Ma and the devotees, people that came to meet her. So.
Some of them were at more formal gatherings, like at a retreat.
Mm-hmm.
She had these retreats every year called the Samyam Saptaha, which means 7 days of self-restraint. And devotees would come from all over India to different sacred sites. She had one in Kurukshetra, which is the site of, the Bhagavad Gita.
Uh-huh.
She had the Allahabad, different sacred sites. She would have the sanyams, and people would gather, and every night there was question and answer. She would have she would call them Mahatmas, great beings come and give talks. But in the evening, people settled in for questions and answers with Ma. And that's what's recorded here and transcribed here. So satsang literally means, sat means truth. Sang is a gathering. So satsang is a gathering in the truth. And in this case, questions and answers with Ma.
Wow.
And she never wrote a book. She was illiterate. So this is all we have. There are other people who've taken notes at these satsangs, but this is all we have from the recorded tapes.
Okay. And so the gospel means like good news, right?
Yeah.
So you already said a little bit, but what do you think is the good news that this great mother is giving to her kids? Repeatedly.
Beautiful question. Yeah, beautiful question. What is the good news? The good news is that we are not who we think we are.
Yeah.
I think I'm this, 78-year-old woman with lots of children and, a husband and this and that. But really, I am that. I am the one. There is no second. And so she, in so many skillful ways, because she did have a period in her life where she practiced all the different religious traditions and their practices, their sadhanas, so that she could relate to Christians coming to her, to Muslims coming to her. Everybody did come to her. She welcomed everyone. And then she would, translate these great truths, really, from the Hindu scriptures into whatever language they would really understand. So the good news is we are God. We are absolute reality, and there's no separation between you and me. We're just in this kind of play of consciousness where we're playing different roles. We're pretending that we're not the absolute. And so she has so many wonderful ways of saying that. And there are also some very funny stories that she tells that I really enjoyed, being able to keep them in. The other thing I did was I didn't edit her tapes at all. I mean, I didn't cut anything from what she said, because if she's a fully realized ultimate reality being, everything she said is important. So when she would repeat a story, I would repeat the story. If she would repeat a line, I would repeat the line, because I feel as though this is the record we have, at least of the last 20 years. And the other thing that's interesting is I think some people felt that they were kind of sneaking the tape recorders in to tape record her, but some of the women who were close to her, who were responsible for recording her talks, found that if they didn't turn it on, or if they tried to hide it under a chair, she would say, where's the tape recorder? So she wanted us to hear these words. And that really touches me. It wasn't as though they were secretly taping her.
She knew anything.
Yeah, she knew.
You couldn't hide anything from her, I guess.
No.
Okay, and is there any stories that you would like to recall? Some particular conversation that really had an impact, for example, on you going through it?
Oh, in this book?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in terms of the stories she told, the one she told the most was about a farmer who is a very simple man who hears, as people are walking through his fields, that the king is holding a contest and is going to give the throne to anyone who can answer these 4 simple questions. Who is God? Where is God? What does God like? And so forth. I won't go into the whole story because it is complicated, but the fact is, he gets in line with all of these great Mahatmas to answer the questions. And the main question is, where is God? And he answers it without just effortlessly, all 4 questions, but he says, where is God not? And the king is just blown away. And in the end wants to give him the throne, but the farmer wants to go back to his field. But the king says, how did you become so wise that you knew ultimate reality? You understood all this. And he said, I attend satsang. Who knows where? But it was one of Ma's many plugs for satsang, the importance of not practicing necessarily alone, but being together with other like-minded people who are also seeking the ultimate truth and the inspiration that can come from that. So I love that story. And one time my sister was visiting our house when we were having a satsang. My sister is a Christian and didn't really believe in any of the stuff that I've been interested in my whole life, but she decided to come to satsang. And for some reason, I chose that story to read out loud at satsang. And of course, the bottom line was that the farmer, and she's a farmer. So the farmer had the ultimate knowledge. And so she was like, that was the best story. So I felt Ma inspired me to read that particular story at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. It is so meaningful. I mean, because of course, ultimate knowledge doesn't come from having studied or, learning it on papers, but by being on satsang so close to someone who realized it.
That's right.
Yeah. And connected to this, so because of course, I guess the impact of a person who realized it in repeating that we are not who we think we are has a transformational power, right? Because if I tell you, oh, you are not who you think you are. I mean, okay, it can be a good reflection and all, but I guess there is a transformational power, a transmission really, when realized being says
Absolutely.
that, right?
Yes. And, I have always felt so sad that I missed seeing Ma in person, because in my other book, which is more about more stories of the transformation in people's lives, in devotees' lives when they were with Ma, I feel I wish I had been with her in person. However, what I experienced, and certainly when I was reading her words over those many years that I was editing this book, is there is a transmission that comes from her words, even if you read them on paper. And the stories of so many people. For example, we had a satsang here the other night, and a new person showed up, a woman. She was a doctor, a gynecologist. She came here, she drove an hour and a half, and somehow she saw Ma's picture online. And she said that Ma's presence came out of the screen to her. And since then, she just can't get enough. So she came here and she bought all the books that we had for sale. She was singing. She was completely transformed by meeting Ma online. So these days we have these other vehicles for Ma's transmission. This transmission from a realized being, or in her case, an avatar, that can take place through her picture, through reading her words. So there's, so many things online now. So this is the positive side of being in this age of technology, is that she's accessible to people so easily.
Yeah.
You can see her talking, you can watch movies of her, and many, many pictures, stories online.
And so she was recommending, like, for each person, she gave a different answer.
Correct.
And a different way of practicing, because of course everybody has a different mind.
One of the phrases that I love that comes from the Buddhist tradition is this idea of skill and means, upaya koshalya, and she had that, because she could see everyone I've met. I mean, in the first book, all the stories of people's first meetings with her, she knew their whole life. She knew everything about them. She knew their obstacles, their agonies. She knew everything. And so each person, she would recommend a different kind of sadhana, depending on what they needed. And that changed over time, too. So even though she said, I am not a guru, she acted as a guru for thousands of people. And, for one woman that I interviewed in Calcutta, it was singing, a devotional bhajans every day for an hour. For someone else, it was every Sunday doing nothing but meditating for the whole day. It was very, very different depending on the needs, the capacities of each person. So she wasn't stuck with a one-size-fits-all. I mean, in general, meditation, contemplation of the scriptures, japa, repetition of mantra, chanting, satsang,
And the ways that she was, let's say, naming this God, this absolute, I read that she was sometimes calling it as a masculine, let's say Bhagavan, sometimes as a neutral like that, and sometimes as a feminine like the Shakti, the divine. So I find very interesting also that her way of expressing it was just so fluid.
That's really true. In fact, I think maybe you were reading the introduction to the Gospels. I wanted to lift that up because people, especially women who are feminists, as I am, they would get disturbed if they saw that she was saying he. So I picked one certain paragraph where she used he, she, and it, that, in one paragraph to show that it was very fluid, because there's only one reality.
Sure.
And you could slap whatever pronoun you want to on it, but she was very clear. That's why she kept switching it up. She wanted people to feel comfortable who felt God as mother. She also wanted people to feel comfortable who felt that God is a formless ultimate reality. So she would, in even one day, one talk, would be mentioning many different ways to identify ultimate reality. So it was very easy to relate to, and you could just listen for what you wanted to hear, Yeah, and I also feel that when she was giving a talk, and I've heard people say this, there were 400, 500 people there, everyone was getting what they needed. And then when it was time, people could have a private meeting with her called a private. And they would often, come with a list of 10 questions. And when they got into her actual presence, they had nothing to ask.
Yeah.
Everything had been answered. So I think that would have been me. Lots of questions and then just sinking into presence. Yeah.
That sounds to me, from how you're describing, that, she was really like a divine mother who knows all her kids and exactly what they need in that moment. And this is like so beyond the mind, because not even your mother could be so precise, and knowing basically your karma, where you're coming from. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
And people had experiences around her where they would, in seeing her, they would go back into a past life experience, so that Ma saw their past lives. She saw everything that brought them to this moment. So yeah, it was a kind of knowing, a kind of mothering that we can't even imagine. And I think the other thing is that so many people have come to Ma since she left her body. I mean, I have a friend who wrote a book, Oriane Aymard. She wrote a book on what's happened since Ma left her body. And she interviewed a lot of people, in particular, about experiences they had of Ma. You know, I remember someone coming to satsang once online here from New Zealand, and Ma had shown up in his backyard. And he didn't know who this woman was in the backyard. And then she sort of faded away. He had to go to the internet to recognize her.
Yeah.
Another woman, a German woman who had a dream of Ma that was so very real. And she came to India looking for her. And she kept saying, she looks like this, she wears white. But, you know, it's hard to describe Ma because it's such a felt experience. And then when she came to the ashram, which is called Ma Sharanam, Refuge of Ma, that my friend Swami Guru Sharan runs near Indore, she goes into her guest room, and there's this picture on the wall, and it's the image of Ma that she had in her dream. She said, and she realized that the person she's been looking for is Anandamayi Ma. She came to her, but she's not in her body anymore. So she's still coming to people. It's just quite amazing. And touching them and bringing them, you know, along on their path, helping them along on their path. So, you know, although she was only here for 86 years, it seems as though she's still very much with all of us. And she says, if you have seen me or even heard my words once, you will never be able to lose me for the rest of your life. I will always be with you. And whenever you think of me, it's because I was thinking of you. It's one of her promises.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, after
This was so fun.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this incredibly precious work you did, putting all your, you know, intelligence and sensitivity in this, and doing this amazing work. So this book is really precious. This one and this one. And of course also Mother of Bliss, which was the first one. Yeah. So thank you so much, Prajna, for sharing.
Thank you for coming.
Yes.
It's so beautiful to have you here. It's a blessing. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my honor and my pleasure. Yeah. So if you want to know more about Prajna Hallstrom, you can find information in the link below. Also, maybe regarding the Anandamayi Ma Ashram.
We have an ashram website. Yeah.
Yes, perfect. You can find the link below. If you want to know more about the Women Awakening Project, which is this project of sharing the wisdom of women across all spiritual traditions, you also find information on our website and ways to support us. So thank you again.
Thank you for your beautiful work. It's really going to transform so many lives. Thank you.
Let's see. I'm not doing it. You know, it's
no, but you're lifting all of this up for people to experience, and that's really precious. Thank you.
Yeah, it's precious because I see that women are really open for this. They are really up for this. So when I asked if you want to be interviewed, they say yes, please come. You know, they are happy to. So you see, I'm lifting something that is lifting itself.
Well, we all know how important it is at this time, especially. You know, the world, sometimes we feel as though patriarchy is still so alive and well.
Yeah.
And yet we know that this divine feminine is rising up at this time. And we have all of these inspiring ways to relate to it.
Exactly.
So it's the time for the sacred feminine. Yeah.
It is.